to other command systems of its own. And it downloads some other files. You say, well, that must be crazy. Any reasonable supplier of security systems with an antivirus system in place would detect this. This particular one has been around for some time, and similar viruses, the flamer worm, for example, has been detected on systems and has been proved to have been there for about 4 or 5 years. So is this the end of antivirus systems? Well, it might well be, mightn't it? It's closely related to the Stuxnet worm. Again, nodding heads, yes, we know about Stuxnet worm. This was the one which was used by a foreign government to attack the Iranian nuclear separation plant. It caused the ultracentrifuge systems to overheat and therefore go wrong. I won't speculate on which foreign government would want that to happen, but you can see, if you are a foreign government, then you have the resources to write some very sophisticated pieces of attack technology. The trouble is, once some foreign government has written one, and a lot of amateurs out there can say, well, that's an interesting piece of code. If I modify that, I can use that to attack, say, Citibank or Warwick University. You know, it's just a question of changing a few lines of code. But this particular one, you know, if you download it to the right place, and how do we get it into a particular organisation? Well, you need a kind of targeted kind of approach. You could send it on sample CDs through the post. You could send it with phishing attacks on email systems. Or, of course, you could send it by attaching it to a piece of code that came back when one of your dodgy employees out there went to a site which they shouldn't have been going to, hence the previous class. And this particular one is not only a nice piece of code, it's hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and the code is actually signed. It's signed by a certificate authority, which our cryptographer in the background there will actually recognise as a legitimate way of proving that this code, in fact, has some kind of origin, and it's essentially a trustworthy piece of code. If you could get something like that signed by Microsoft or Adobe or IBM or any of the other organisations which your browser inherently trusts, then it's very easy to get that piece of code onto somebody's desktop. So breaking into somebody's certificate authority system maybe is a prerequisite to forming the other kind of attack. But this one was certainly signed. And of course, once it's got onto your system and it's doing its job of sending data back using this wonderful exfiltration system, how does it get data back out through all the firewalls and the intrusion protection systems that the suppliers have set up? Well, of course, it uses HTTP. Any fool knows HTTP goes through firewalls, so you know that's an easy way of getting data back out the system. And in fact, they used HTTPS, so they encrypted the data going back out. So in fact, it was difficult to inspect that data, so you couldn't easily see what was being sent out. You just knew it was an HTTPS link. A spy's arriving. Right, yeah, you're very well. I'm not going to start again, I promise. I won't start. And this kind of Trojan or virus or whatever is usually linked to a command center, so you can turn it on and off and you can tell it what to do. And the Dooku worm, in fact, has abilities to turn on and off the microphone on a PC, or to turn on and off the camera on the PC. So it can collect data selectively from particular IP addresses, package that data up, compress the data, make an HTTPS connection, and then exfiltrate the data at a low rate, so that if you are the supplier of a security system, you say, well, you know, it would be really suspicious if people started sending gigabytes of data, because it would overload the bandwidth and we would detect it. So, of course, this particular worm sends it at a low rate, sends it during working hours. It doesn't send it at night when it shouldn't actually be sending anything at all. And so it's very difficult to detect anything anomalous. Now, this particular one I'm thinking of, in fact, has being used as an information stealer, things that change systems are usually quite easy to detect because you can put in checksums and signatures and so on and check that they've changed. Somebody who's just got read access to your data, it's much more difficult to see whether anything's going wrong. Normally, when you're auditing a system, you don't normally log read events. There's just too many of them. But of course, read events are just the ones which compromise your confidentiality. As I say, the data was then encrypted and sent out to the system. Now, in our hypothetical scenario, various things could happen as a result. Clearly, the directors get upset. You remember that picture with all of the boardroom people sitting around saying, we want a really secure system and we want it free. So they discovered that they lost important customer data and that they don't know how much of the data really has been lost from the system. Therefore, the best thing they can do immediately is say, well, it must have been the supplier who did something wrong. We'll sue the suppliers. And we'll sue auditors for not detecting that there was some error in the way in which the contract was set up and the thing was working. And of course, I had on that graph earlier, the disclosure events, the law on disclosures now forces this company to actually disclose that something bad has happened. It's not going to improve the share price. It's not necessarily going to keep the directors on their board sleeping happily. Once, of course, it becomes public, then say you're part of the critical national infrastructure, say you are part of the electricity generation network or the transport network, then quite clearly the government is interested in what's actually happened here. Supplier was implicated. The supplier said, well, actually, we're completely innocent because we did exactly what the customer wanted us to do. We can prove we've got service level agreements, we can prove against the contract exactly what was wanted, and we've got compliance checks to say that we were doing the right thing. But they would say that in some sense, wouldn't they? And the supplier also explained that, in fact, the problem had occurred on the customer's side, not the supplier's side. So, in other words, the supplier was looking after all of the servers, they were putting in patches, they were doing the right things, as it were, regarding firewalls, but it was your bad guy, or your dodgy kind of worker who downloaded some code which made all this work. And the customer said, well, yes, but I told you to keep the system secure. You should have told me that there were threats, that there were new vulnerabilities here. So you can see the dilemma occurring and the whole thing dissolving into a horrible legal kind of sue you and we'll sue you as well. You know, it's a kind of process which doesn't really help after the event. But the essence of it was saying right at the beginning of this talk, in some sense, when we said the customers just wanted the system to be secure, and the suppliers said, yes, we can do that for you. And everyone said, well, actually, why didn't the antivirus systems work? Well, as I say, I think we're coming to the end of antivirus systems. Oh, and by the way, the media made a lot of money out of it. What would you expect? You know, it was a good story. And the moral of all this story, it's not usual to get to the point of a lecture sort of quite so far through it in some sense. But the essence of what I do is governance, risk and compliance. And we do this partly to make sure that the customers actually know what they're talking about when they buy something, and partly to make sure that IBM, as it were, knows what we're trying to sell to the customers. So we try and join them up by identifying, reporting risks, setting up some kind of governance framework, and setting up a decision matrix for compliance. You say, well, that's, you know, it's all fine words, but what does it actually mean? This is where the management science comes into it in some sense. This is the bit where somebody says, well, okay, yes, we'll have some of this governance, risk and compliance. Now what is it? Anyone going to volunteer kind of to be our governance leader? Everyone knows the difference between governance and government. Right, yeah, we're okay. Big step forward. Governance is, they agree on reporting structure, roles and responsibilities, who's the senior information risk owner, who are the information asset owners, what's the process for escalating every particular event, risk, threat, etc. inside the organisation, and the priorities of, say, service level agreements versus incident management. No use you saying, well, the service level agreement says we stop work at 5, if it actually says, well, actually the Dooku worm broke out at 5 past 5, and we're not doing anything till tomorrow. You know, it's not good for the reputation either way around. So you have to agree up front on what the governance is going to do, what the rules are for handling those situations. Compliance, in some sense, is the easy part of this. As long as you get the rules right, the regulatory policy, the list of things to be complied with, Data Protection Act, EU laws on privacy, the payment card industry's data security standard, ISO 27001. Anyone got a list of things to comply with? There ought to be a kind of game as to we can go around and see. There's more things to comply with than you really need, but they overlap a great deal, and so in fact you can reduce all of the compliance problem to a much shorter list.